To the first one on supply chain, I think we have three components of our spaceflight system. There's the mothership, the spaceship, and our propulsion system. And our approach to each of those will heavily integrate the aerospace supply chain, aerospace organizations within the supply chain, but in different ways. So for the mothership, we are actively pursuing a strategic relationship, both to kind of accelerate and advance the engineering and tooling development, as well as the then manufacturing and assembly of that piece. Our motherships, as you're aware, are more of a standard aircraft piece. It's unique, clearly, but we can leverage supply chain really well there. So that will be taking heavy advantage of the supply chain there, and we're very pleased with the progress we've been making on that. With our spaceships, as we scale now, have more opportunity to go into the aerospace supply system with greater volume, and that allows us to do more leveraging the supply chain, both for parts and for sub-assemblies, and for some of those can be very large sub-assemblies along the way as it goes. So spaceships will also take heavy advantage there. And then propulsion, same thing. There's a deep material base and subcomponents within our propulsion system. We brought in a new leader of our supply chain business, Lisa. She's fantastic. Great experience. Started with Honeywell and has gone through aerospace supply chain for quite some time, and she's really ramped up and jump-started our efforts here. As to the kind of magic and the logic, we were very encouraged with the response from our spacefarer community. Like I said, they're wonderful people who've been along with us just for a little bit, but reasonably little work on our part to do pre-qualifications of that group. And so to be kind of around 100 spaceflight reservations from that group at the new price points, we just thought really showed the value of what we're doing. Now you're talking about where are we going on the consumer experience. We didn't bring much to talk about today, but we are parallel pathing we're generally looking at it as kind of a word of the astronaut campus that we will be developing as a place where, as we start to scale up with multiple flights in quick succession, where will the people be preparing in the number of days before and the day after their flight. That work is very exciting. We'll be bringing that forward in future earnings calls. And embedded within that work, Oliver, is parallel experience tracks for friends and family to come in. We do expect the astronauts to bring friends and family. We do expect that is kind of incorporated into the price point as they come along the way. So that $450,000 price point includes the ability to bring some friends and family. And we think that is a smart business strategy as well. Not only does it make the experience for the astronauts stronger, I think this is going to be the first people raising their hands saying, I'd like to go next, is having been through and seen what's happening up close and having the emotion of that. So good progress on that one, and more to come in future calls.
Thank you. Best regards.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. The next question comes from the line of Doug Harned with Bernstein. You may proceed.
Thank you.
Hi, Doug.
I wanted to first make sure I understood the demand side. So you had 600 originally, and then you've added 100 since you went to the higher price point of $450K. But you said you've got about 60,000 expressions of interest. It seems, perhaps naively, it seems that you could have filled up those last 300 slots pretty easily out of that. How does that work? Why is that not the case, that you really could get immediately to that 1,000 level?
Well, I will first let me kind of clarify the numbers and how to think about each of them, and then generally I agree with you. We are very positive and optimistic on filling the last 1,000, which would be our first 1,000 before commercial service. So the first thing we did was, as promised, go back to a spacefarer community. This was under 1,000 people with a pretty little pre-qualification, as we discussed, and we effectively used that, not quite beta test, but used it to test our sales process. Right? We have CRM tools that we brought to bear against this, and on a fairly small audience population, could test the kind of customer journey we would use to take that group into very highly qualified leads. And with those leads is where we invested the time for one-on-one sales calls that are reasonably lengthy, but still able to move in a fairly efficient path. The conversion rates from the sales calls to actually committed spaceflight reservations was very strong. Another thing that we were pleased about along the way. So we liked how our CRM mechanisms did the right level of filtering, and we saw that through great conversion from that going forward. Now, separate from that Spacefarer group, following Unity 22, we opened up kind of our interest list, just kind of raise your hand if you're interested in learning about our product. And we had around 60,000 people say, yes, please send me information about your product, your space flight. I'm interested in flying to space. We think many of those people will want to actually make the trip with all of what's involved. But some of them, as they learn about the information, will probably be aspirational astronauts that will want to go in the future somewhere down the road. So this is, now that we've used the Spacefarer group to assess the customer journey through the CRM mechanism, we can now apply that effectively at the 60,000 and bring back high quality candidates to put the effort of our individual calls on. So that's how we're doing that. The reason we're being purposeful on the pace is each one of these people we onboard into our future astronaut community. And that's very, very important because this is where people will spend the time mentally and kind of emotionally preparing for the space flight. And we have the time to do it. We know we've got this 8 to 9 months expansion or enhancement program in front of us. And we know we'll be starting to fly up commercial service in the fourth quarter. That's what we're expecting. So we have time to do this well. That's why we started with this first group of spacefarers. I will say what we do expect, to your point, is these 60,000 people are going to likely have much more demand versus the remaining 300 or so seats we have left in our first 1,000. And we will then take the overflow of that 60,000 demand and funnel into a new spacefarer group. And that's the group we will give first access to the next tranche of tickets. So we're always going to stay active at the top of the funnel, but then release tickets in tranches so that we can put dedicated sales effort against those and always stay ahead of the pace.
And then, if I can, on the schedule you've talked about for the next mothership for the Delta class. Now, as I understood it before, the intent had been to do about 36 flights in 2023 and then have the Delta class ready before 2024. Given the change in schedule that you've talked about and also some of the things, the new development center, it seems like you've got a lot to do here. How has that schedule changed, if at all?
So a couple things I'd say. While there is clearly work to do as we grow our commercial business, as I kind of set out at the beginning of the call, that's where we've really spent the last 9 months positioning the company to be able to handle that work, both in the focus of the company with additional resources that we brought in at the leadership level. Now as we're prioritizing building up the teams to go after this, all of which is done in a way that we can move off of I'll call it maybe a milestone focus, which was done during the prototyping phase, to very specific and purposeful programs that accumulate value over the long term. So we're ready for the amount of work that is coming. As to 23, what we try to give is we expect Unity, which will be coming on board for commercial service in the end of 22. We expect it to fly basically on a monthly basis. And then with Imagine, it will start its flight test program in the first quarter of 23. That will be those will be revenue generating is what we expect, but with research flights. And then as we get into the second half of 23, we will flip Imagine over from research into private astronaut flights. So, and we think Imagine we expect to run on kind of a twice a month, every 2-week basis. So that gives you some ability to do some calculating on flight rate in 23. We have not provided guidance on the timing on the Delta class, but what I would tell you is we expect the Delta program to be on par with other rapid aircraft development programs. Same with the mothership there. So we are moving at pace. That's why you see us pulling down a new design center down in the southern LA basin. That's why you'll see us ramping up our engineering resources. It's why you see us expanding our supply chain with some strategic relationships right off the bat. All of these are to get this work going and done in strong order.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Harned. The next question comes from the line of Kristine Liwag with Morgan Stanley. You may proceed.
Hi, Christine.
Christine, are you there? Maybe you're on mute. Operator, why don't we go to the next question, and if Christine comes back into the queue, we can come back to her.
Certainly. The next question is from the line of Christine has joined the queue again. So Christine, your line is now open.
Hi, Christine.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Oh, great. Thanks. Sorry about that. Michael, with the planned fleet expansion, can you discuss the cash investment requirements for the EVE enhancement and the Unity enhancement and the timeline of that cash cost?
So I'll give just a note on what we're doing and maybe let Doug pick up any specifics behind it. But you're seeing our spend going to a larger amount in the fourth quarter is kind of guidance we're giving. And that makes sense, right? We're working on multiple ships as we go into this enhancement program. And that enhancement program is going to carry itself out kind of in the manufacturing facility all the way through the first half of the next year. So that's where you heard Doug sharing that we expect that elevated level of spend to continue into 22. And then as that's happening, we're of course also building up our design efforts, moving into tooling, moving into kind of the early ways in which we're going to get the Delta and the mothership programs kind of accelerated beyond concept and design and into those later phases. So that was the structural piece. I'll let Doug maybe talk anything further from a specific standpoint you'd want to share, Doug.
I think it's important to think about the phasing of this work, and you know, we're really excited to be moving into this next chapter here with expansion of our fleet with the new mothership and the Delta class. But yeah, at the front end, you've got the investment in NRE, right? That's the initial part, which is, you know, it's geared towards that first artifact there in the fleet, and you see that investment that we then get to leverage as we go forward because we now have invested that time in the design, and then we make copies basically as we roll forward. So you've got sort of that front end investment that pays dividends for years. But as Michael mentioned, you've got the NRE phase, engineering phase, the tooling gets going, and you start to get into supply chain development, and then leading into parts fabrication and assembly. So it'll phase in that traditional order, but the front end will be mostly focused on the NRE.
I see. And maybe following up on VSS Inspire, from what I understood, you guys have the parts to build that space ship already. What's the decision tree here in terms of building that, or maybe going straight from Imagine to Delta?
Sure. So we have about 85% of the parts of Inspire have been completed, and the priority for us is to get to commercial service and scale it. That's our clear priority. And so you see our focus first in two areas, getting through this enhancement program so that we can bring Unity Imagine with the mothership Eve, which will have greater capacity with it now, up and into service. And so that's one clear focus. The Delta class ships will be, as Doug mentioned, while we're going to go through an NRE period here, then we're going to be making copies, right? That's a production model spaceship that will be less expensive to build and operate on a per spaceflight basis and at a much higher rate of service, so we'll get more throughput on it. Those are clear. That, along with the new mothership that will carry that Delta program of ships, those are the main priorities right now. And so then Inspire allows us an optionality. And so we're taking our time to assess when and where and how to go forward with Inspire. But we are clearly putting our efforts right now into those 3 legacy ships, as well as the future fleet with Delta, the next mothership program.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you, Ms. Liwa. The next question comes from the line of Ron Epstein with Bank of America. You may proceed.
Hey, Ron.
Good evening. So just maybe a follow-on to some of the prepared remarks. You guys mentioned potential future inflows of capital to help finance all this. How are you thinking about that? Is that more equity? Is that debt? Is that converts? I mean, what are you thinking about?
Sure, I'll take that, Ron. So thanks for the question. We're headed into an important phase of activity right here, which is, I think, going to provide some great catalysts for our company. We've got the enhancement program going on, getting us ready for commercial service. We've also got Delta and next-gen mothership work going on to expand our fleet. So I do expect those to be good catalysts for our company as we move forward. Now, keeping in mind we have $1 billion of cash and equivalents and so on the balance sheet, so that gives us a great runway for this work. We've got spaceflight revenue starting to kick in already, the deposits coming in, and that will continue. And so then that leaves us with opportunistically looking at the capital markets as needed. But again, we've got a good runway here before we need to do that. But we have options, right? There's multiple ways to go about that, whether it's equity or debt. Those are all available to us, and we'll look at those more closely as we get to that point.
Got it. And then maybe just a follow-on to the supply chain. How are you thinking of managing that? I mean, as you guys want to ramp up production, we're going to be probably in a phase where all of civil aerospace will be ramping up. The big OEMs will be ramping, the business jet manufacturers will be ramping. How are you going to manage that? Because typically, I mean, like any business, the big guys kind of get first dibs at the trough. So, I mean, how do you think about that, and how do you manage that risk?
Well, I think a lot of that goes to selecting your supply chain partners thoughtfully and with supply chain partners that are excited and looking forward to diversify their business with things of what we're doing, versus somebody who just really needs to focus on giant volume of commercial air. But there's a wide ecosystem, as you're well aware, in that category. Now, in the management of that ecosystem, we intend to be extremely active. And as with most supply chain efforts, ensuring the quality and the partnership with those partners is really, really critical. So we will be building our supply chain team to be present both with the suppliers when they're large major pieces, as well as very intensive quality efforts on things that are more parts fabrication and things like that. But we think there is going to be great response. We've seen great response in the supply chain for what we are looking to do and the volumes in which we are doing it there. But we just will be thoughtful, and we have enough different options in front of us that we're not concerned, I think, to the question you're raising. Is there just going to be no capacity in the aerospace supply area? We do think the economy is coming back. We do see aerospace coming back, but we still see plenty of supply and partners who are interested in working for us.
Got it. And then maybe just one last one. I mean, given all the changes in the programmatics and what's going on, when do you expect to be cash flow positive?
So the key to that will be really the ramp of the Delta class, and that's what our focus is on. So when you start to see the volume of ships ramp there and the passenger quantities ramp, that provides the real significant increase in our cash inflows, which that's kind of the point in time to think about.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Epstein. The next question comes from the line of Scott Forbes with Jefferies. You may proceed.
Hi, thank you. Just to kind of circle back to the demand side, you talked about some positive feedback around updated pricing, but has there been any impact to order conversion from the flight delay, and have you seen any meaningful change in the demographics of your customers?
Let's see. First on delay, we have not seen, I would call it any impact to our demand or really even to our existing base of future astronauts from the shift in schedule. And we're just in the movement of Unity 23, just for clarity, while we moved the Unity 23 flight, that one individual flight from the beginning of the enhancement period to the end. So that one flight has I'd say a multi-month shift. The actual shift on our overall program is de minimis. So the Imagine will come on board. The Delta class isn't impacted by this change in when Unity 23 is. So our actual building up of real flight capacity and movement of the future astronauts isn't impacted by this much at all. So we haven't seen an impact from that standpoint. And then I'm sorry, Scott, one was, what was the second part of your question there?
Just the change in demographics of customers, if there's been any.
We're so early. We've had 100 people come in from the Spacefarer group, and this was a group that was, I'd say, on board and hand-raising even before Unity 22 and our next outreach. So we'll have to go through and sort the demographics of it, but probably is more relevant as we then go through this next 60,000 to kind of close out the first 1,000 people. That's where I think we'll start to have enough data in front, and we can bring some of that data back on future calls. I think it's a good question.
And then one quick follow-up. I mean, you've been able to largely navigate through these issues as they arise pretty well in the development phase, but from a overarching risk perspective, where do you see yourself on the learning curve as you kind of move towards unlocking this full flight potential?
This is, as I put kind of, I think even on the front slide at the beginning here, this is a really important period for us. And we talked about it as going from a prototyping space innovator, which is where this company has been, and really a powerful and audacious task that has been completed. And now we're going to become a global scale commercial enterprise. And that comes along with comes along with the requirements to be able to plan, predict, deliver in a more focused and more predictable fashion. You see the work we've done over the last 9 months has been building towards this. We've focused the company down on commercial scale. So whereas as a prototyper, the company's really organized around milestones. Let's get to the next flight. Let's get to the next singular flight, and everything kind of running on that milestone. What you're seeing now is just a very good example. We're taking, a multi-month period here to take these ships to where they can be bolstered to where they are able to fly without inspections on a flight-by-flight basis, and that moves our cadence up, right? Those are long-term decisions. All of our focus is trying to move the decision-making in the company to create value for the long term. And then we've taken that focus, added really strong leadership coming in. We have incredible engineering and manufacturing talent. We're now adding to that. So this is the period where we are moving to commercial because we feel very confident in the technical underpinnings of our spaceflight system. That was what that big first chapter was, is getting that technical risk worked through and put into a place where we're now ready to commercialize it. So we feel very confident in how we're moving forward now at this phase, and that's why you're seeing us take longer time periods to basically kind of lock it in and take longer time periods to get the design of the Delta class so that we can now deliver those on cost-effective bases that allow flow-through to happen on